Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. We'll give it a few more minutes for everyone to hop on. For those of you that are here and getting yourself settled, if you want to open up your chat window at the bottom, you can say hi to the panelists, or be sure to put your questions in the chat, or you can use the Q&A. Either one, we'll be monitoring both, and I'll remind everyone as we get going. Oh, yeah, so wonderful to see everyone making comments in the chat. You guys, thank you so much. Welcome all of you for attending. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. Welcome all of you who are jumping on. Again, we'll give it another minute or two. It always takes a little while for everybody to get on, get set up, get their glass of wine. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. It's 5 o'clock here. Okay. I'll give it one more minute. I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name's Kim Bissell, and I'm one of the co-owners of Broadway Books, and my part it'll give everyone a few more minutes to jump in if they haven't yet. Thank you all for joining us tonight, along with Sally McPherson, my co-owner. We're thrilled to be able to host these fine women, at least virtually, at Broadway Books. We thank you all for your support this last year. And after 15 very long months, our bricks and mortar store has officially reopened. You can join us at the store between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Tuesday through Friday, and 10 to 5 on Saturdays. We feel a bit giddy with all the excitement in the store these days, and we look forward to seeing you all in person soon. Before we get to the main event, I'd love to share some information about a couple of our other virtual events in June. On Wednesday, June 16th at 6 o'clock p.m. Pacific time, we welcome Richard Brown, reading and discussing his new book, This Is Not For You, An Activist Journey of Resistance and Resilience, published by OSU Press. Mr. Brown is a Black Panther, an activist, a photographer, and one of Portland's most interesting people. He spent his life working to bridge the divide between Portland's Black community and the police. He'll be sharing some of his stories and hopefully a few photographs in conversation with his co-author Brian Benson and young activist Eloise Doubleday. Not an event to miss. Again, June 16th at 6 p.m. We're excited to host virtually Amy Mason Doan in conversation with Julie Clark for the Portland launch of her new novel, Lady Sunshine, on Wednesday, June 30th at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time. Lady Sunshine is the epitome of the best kind of summer read. It's smart, funny, historical, and with just the right amount of intrigue. So join us for the fun. Again, Wednesday, June 30th, 5:30 p.m. You can find links to register for both of these events, as well as book recommendations, general store info, and our 24-hour-a-day book ordering platform at our website, www.broadwaybooks.net. You can also find recordings of our past events, and you'll be able to find recordings for this event and for our upcoming events post-event as well. A few housekeeping items for tonight. Be sure to keep an eye on the chat for links to purchase and support any of the writers speaking tonight, as well as our fiercely independent bookstore. If you have questions for any of the speakers, feel free to enter them in the chat or use the Q&A function. We'll be checking both. And now for the main event. How to navigate the publishing industry is forever a challenge for any writer, and we welcome these three wonderful talents who are willing to share their stories and sage experience here tonight. These three women met as they were all students of Tom Spanbauer and his original Dangerous Writing group. So Ellen Michelson is a physician in Portland, MFA graduate from Pacific University. She's currently an assistant professor of medicine at OHSU and the vice president of the board of the Northwest Narrative Medicine Collaborative. She was an NEH Fellow in Medical Humanities and attended the Breadloaf Writers Conference. Her work has appeared in creative nonfiction, Portland Monthly, Women in Solitude from the SUNY Press, and Literature and Medicine. The Care of Strangers, published by Melville House and the winner of the 2019 Miami Book Fair DeGroot Prize, is her first book. Joanna Rose is the author of an award-winning novel, Little Miss Strange, winner of the Pacific Northwest Booksellers Prize and finalist for the Oregon Book Award. Her poetry, essays, and short fiction have appeared in Story Magazine, Oregon Humanities, High Desert Journal, Voice Catcher, Calyx, and Bellingham Review. Her essay, That Thing with Feathers, was cited as notable in the 2015 Best American Essays. Joanna works with youth in Portland Public Schools on writing and co-hosts the long-running critique group Pinewood Table. Her new novel is A Small Crowd of Strangers, published by local Forest Avenue Press. Susie Vitello's award-winning short pieces have appeared in The Rumpus, the Southampton Review, Mississippi Review, Plasm, Tarpaulin Sky, among other literary journals. She has been a prize winner in the Atlantic Monthly Student Fiction Contest and has been a recipient of the Oregon Literary Arts Grant. Susie works as a book coach and editor through her company, wordsinahurry.com. Again, wordsinahurry.com. Her young adult novels include The Moment Before, The Empress Chronicles, and The Keepsake. And her new novel, Faultland, is written for adults and is published by Ooligan Press. So I'm going to pass the stage now on to Joanna Rose. So let's go ahead and start with Joanna. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us tonight.
Hi, thank you so much, Kim. Thank you, Broadway Books. It's so good to be here. And it's going to be good to be there as soon as I can get over to your store again. So we decided we'd go back to the very beginning and how we all started together. And that was, of course, as Kim said, with Tom Spanbauer. Excuse me. So I think I first met Tom when I was running the Powell's Books reading series. And I was in the coffee shop one day, and that was the Ann Hughes coffee room then. And a man came up to me about a reading. It wasn't Tom. This happened quite regularly. People would just come up to me, and usually I would tell people, great, here's my card, have your publisher get in touch or send me something about the book. But this is the day it was different. This man said to me, my friend has a book coming out. He's visiting from New York City. Can he give a reading? And I just wrote my number on a scrap of paper and gave it to him and said, call me. The book was The Man Who Fell in Love with the Moon. I don't think it had even been published yet. And so we had a reading, and Tom read from, I believe he read from Faraway Places, his first novel. And at the reading, I sat in a small crowd next to the late, great Joel Weinstein, publisher of the literary journal Mississippi Mud. And as Tom read, Joel and I just looked at each other and we both said, oh my God. And that's how I started with Tom. Ellen, your story is a little more complicated than that.
Okay. Well, I first met Tom way back a long time ago in New York City in Gordon Lish's infamous workshop. And it was big. There were 45 of us. And we sat in a big amphitheater, and Tom sat at the other, in the middle, at the back, in the middle, and I was on the side. We never actually spoke to each other. And then a little time after that, I saw Faraway Places in a bookstore, and I looked and I said, "Oh, this is." I knew an author. You know, I didn't know any authors back then. I sort of knew him. I'd never said hello to him, but so I bought the book and read it, And then I was, and really I fell in love with it. And then I was walking around the West Side Y, supposed to be attending a workshop, but I didn't know exactly where I was going. And I saw this man standing in the window of a room, and it was Tom. I knew who he was. So he came to the door and said, "Can I help you?" And he just said, "You want to come in?" I said, "Oh, yes." And he didn't know who I was. And so then he asked if anyone in the class wanted to read. And it was his very first class, and I think it might have been the first day. And no one raised their hand, no one volunteered. So I raised my hand. For some reason, I had pages, and I read them. And then after that, he said, "Well, you can stay in my class." And then he fast forward just quickly. He went back to Idaho for a little while, and then he came back to New York to teach again. And then one night he invited all of us to go to Dixon Place for a reading, which was a place in the Lower East Side. And I was the only one that went. And he introduced me to Ellie Coven, the owner of Dixon Place. And he said, "This is my friend Ellen. She's a writer." And that was it. He introduced me as a writer, and it changed my life. So, and the rest is more history. So Susie, why don't you tell us what your first experience with Tom was?
Yeah, so I came to Portland 1989, single mom, had these 2 little babies, and I wanted to be a writer. And I was looking for classes and so on and so forth. And really they had to be a certain night of the week, because that's when I could get childcare. And it just so happened that PSU was having Tom's class that met at PSU one night a week that worked for me. So I took it. And it's really weird because I just realized that it's kind of kismet, because Portland State University published my book. It's just kind of like, oh my God, I started writing at PSU and now I have a book published by them. Anyway, so Tom, was different than I had taken a couple of writing classes before, but never any that I had to read my work out loud. And I have to say that I was so nervous, like how can I possibly, my hands were sweaty, and I, was sitting right next to Tom, and I was like, can you read? And he's like, "Nope, we don't do that here. We all read our work out loud. It's, it's part of the deal," and all of that. And as soon as I did it, I was hooked. It was like this little adrenaline rush. And, I was like, I want more. I want more. So after the class ended, I was really lucky to snag a spot in his Thursday night class, which is where I met these wonderful women and some other notable authors. And we kind of went on from there. So that's how I met that. That's how I started in with this whole deal. And I think now we're going to move back to Joanna, and we're going to talk a little bit about our journeys from, I guess, writing in first person, which was kind of a directive of dangerous writing and Tom Sponbauer, and ultimately, how we moved away from that and embraced some different ways of writing. So, Joanna.
So, kind of a directive is kind of putting it mildly. When you worked with Tom Sponbauer, you wrote in first person. And once I started working with writers beyond Tom's group, I really started to learn how viable third person can be, and not only viable, but expansive. So we're going to get real writer talky here. I've been looking at it closely, both in my own work and in the work of the writers at the Pinewood Table and at my various workshops and my ADDIC classes. And it never fails to amaze me how rich third person can be in voice. Like even in first person, there's a distance between the narrative voice and the voice of the I character. With third person, that distance can be expanded to establish an actual storyteller. It can be shrunk to that first person character talking about themselves. And every sentence implies the question, who says this? And for me, as someone who gets distracted quite easily, I can wander around in that narrative space quite happily. So a small crowd of strangers started out in first person, and a whole first draft was written that way. It was also a framed story, beginning at the end and looking back at how the narrator, Patty Ann, got to an island in the North Pacific with a drunk priest and a dog. And at one point I decided to see what it would take to just put it all in chronological order. Several months, turns out, and a much more dynamic story later, I got the same inclination about changing it to third person. And that took at least a year. I started out just changing the pronouns and the verbs, and I realized it changed the sound of the story. It got funny. In first person, the narrator was deeply introspective and sad. In third person, she changed to kind of ironic and confused. And then along came a second third person character, her husband, and I needed him to have a voice too, or else he was just kind of cold-hearted and selfish. So first person could have supported that, but by then it was in third person. And it turned out he had those layers of awareness, the same as Patty Ann. And those layers of awareness can be explored in third person in a way that first person really can't get to, without a sense of the reader actually dropping in on a therapy session. So that was kind of my journey away from the first person prescription of dangerous writers. And I happily wandered around for years in the permutations of third person. So, Ellen.
So yeah, we all took our journeys away from first person. It took me to go to an MFA program at Pacific to get into third person. One of my advisors, my second advisor, thought that Seema, my main character, was just too mouthy, and she was borderline unreliable. And I guess that was a bad thing. I didn't fully understand, but so she suggested I move to third person, which I did. And lots of things changed. First of all, Seema became really different. She became polite, someone that patients and staff liked. Instead of rubbing up against everybody and pissing people off, she was competent, she was a helper, and she wasn't a troublemaker. And then ironically, it also allowed me to get closer to her feelings by having this distance, which is kind of interesting. And Susie was commenting on that earlier. And so that was my journey. I held on to it for a long time, and there were other things that I held on to, which isn't about first person per se, but on the body stuff, which I don't know if that's part of this conversation. I won't go into that, but that's my story. And after that, I didn't go back. It stayed in third. Susie.
Yeah, it's just so interesting to hear you guys talk about your characters. You know, we were all in workshop together. I knew Patty Ann, Joanna's narrator character, and Ellen Seema. I knew them as first person voices, and it was really cool to pick up the books and have them, you know, be transformed in the sort of third person way. I mean, we could each have written the book and kept it in first person, I suppose, and it would have been, you know, a slightly different book, right? But I shifted from my story. I had 7 points of view, and I had told some in third person and some in first person. It was a mess. It was just a structural, crazy mess. So I kept slimming it down. And I realized when I finally arrived at my 3 perspectives, I realized that I needed to switch them all to third person because I was trying to cover a lot of real estate, both psychically and physically. And, you know, to cover my assorted points of view, it felt a little whiplashy in first person. You know, it felt like, you know, I was deeply in the head of this person, and then I was deeply in the head of this person. And I wanted that, that sort of labial, you know, being able to go back and forth in terms of distance. And in third person close, you can really get as close as you want. You can get as close as first person, but you also have that ability to kind of, you know, move the lens back here. So, and Joanna talked about irony, and that's what I found as well, is that really with distance, you allow that irony, you allow the absurdities, you allow this sort of thing with, you know, your unreliability, for instance, like your character at the beginning of this book, most of my characters are pretty self-involved. and a little unreliable. And during the course of the book, that sort of changes. And so they become a lot less cynical post-quake. And I just appreciated the latitude that third person allowed to make that change, to make that shift from, at the beginning of the story to the end of the story. So now we're going to talk about the subject that you all are here to hear about, which is perseverance. How long did it take us to write these books and get them published? And why didn't we give up? And, did we put the manuscripts down for a while and pick them back up and, all of that kind of stuff. So we'll head this off. Joanna will head this off again.
Thanks. So yeah, I probably worked on, excuse me, on A Small Crowd of Strangers for 20 years. And yes, I did put it down sometimes. On the whole idea of persistence and perseverance, I can only say that I don't persevere as much as I said, get distracted. And shortly after I finished that first draft of this novel, I got distracted in a big, beautiful way. I started working as a teaching artist for the literary arts program Writers in the Schools and another program called Young Musicians and Artists. And one of my early assignments was at Grant High School, and a teacher wanted to know if I could, in my 15-hour residency, focus on the personal essay. And this was a 1-hour class each day for 3 weeks, which was how we structured the Writers in the Schools program back then. And I had to really dig in. I had neither read much personal essay except for pleasure, and I had not written any. So I really dug in. And when the 3-week class ended, my love affair with the personal essay did not, which is something that can happen when you work with youth writers. So there went a few years writing and publishing personal essays and studying with people like the amazing Andrea Hollander through Soapstone and Wendy Willis at the Attic. But I couldn't leave the novel forever. It was still there. And when I returned to it after a couple of years, it had changed in tone. I think because of my experiment with personal essay, the expository possibilities were a lot more apparent to me. Well, I kept teaching with Writers in the Schools and Young Musicians and Artists for 20 years. And when I first taught poetry, again, at the request of a teacher, again, I had to really dig in. I'd always read poetry, but I needed to know how to teach it beyond just getting kids to write it. I needed to be able to converse about, the mechanics of it. And I'd always, like most people that love to read poetry, it surprised me about how much I didn't know and how much there is to know about poetry. So again, there went a few years. I studied poetry with poets like Kate Gray, who's also a dangerous writer, David Biospiel, and again, Wendy Willis and Andrea Hollander and Paul M. Peterson. And again, I was distracted writing and publishing poems for a few years. But when I looked up, the novel was still there. I would find myself thinking about that place, the geographical locations in the novel, and missing those people. And when I got back to it, it had changed again. And this time I think I saw the greater possibilities of leaps between the images and the sentences. And that was, my years with poetry kind of washing back into the novel. And before I knew it, 20 years, just like that. So Ellen, tell us about your journey, your persistence. You're on mute.
Do it there. Okay. Yeah, I never gave up either. I knew that the book wasn't ready to go out in the world when I finished the first draft with in Tom's workshop, and I knew I needed to learn some more stuff about writing a novel, and I decided to go to Pacific for an MFA, low residency MFA. And I, got a lot of work done there, and it was good. I read a lot. I read a lot that was not in first person, and all sorts of things. And then after I graduated, my thesis advisor passed me on to an editor she worked with to revise the second half of the book. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to start sending it out. So I sent it out to a number of contests. It was a finalist or a semi-finalist in about half a dozen. Then I sent it out to some agents, and about half a dozen also really liked the writing and the material, but there was something missing. They couldn't quite fall in love with Seema enough because the through line wasn't quite there. They said the story was episodic. So I decided to pull back and stop sending it out. And like I said, a couple of years go by here and there. And then I tried to learn more about what was missing. I worked on some short stories again. I did a few essays and got one published in creative nonfiction. But I took time off. I was working. Sometimes I worked on chapters, and I was trying to figure out what Seema really wanted. Then an MFA friend said, "Have you published that novella of yours?" And I said, I'd given up on. Everybody has a different definition of novella, and I had forgotten about that. But they wanted 25 pages, so I sent it in, and then I got shortlisted, and I had 10 days to cut out 6,500 words to be considered, and I cut out 10,000 words. I just got real ruthless and just cut and cut. But then when I realized when I finished that I didn't really have it, needed more stuff needed to go back in, and I spent the next couple months being more ruthless, really paying attention to structure, which I had not wanted to pay attention to for some reason, and giving Seema permission to just say stuff, to just do it. That I'd been held back in a lot of ways by the way I started in minimalism, and so I put back 3,500 words, whatever, and then I sent it out, and I felt that it was ready. Then I don't know that I sent that many contests at that point, but I had the one Miami Book Fair, and I guess I sent a couple. I don't quite remember. And Justin Torres was the judge, and I thought, oh, he's a city guy, city boy. He would be a good judge, and it turned out he was a good judge. He was a perfect judge for this book, and so that was timing and luck and a lot of submitting things again and again. And I wasn't dismayed by that. I just, okay, I'd listen to what they had to say and go back out and do it some more.
Okay, is it my turn? Yeah. Okay, so with Fallen, I began a fictional narrative based upon the speculative big one 6 or 7 years ago. And I wrote a manuscript, and I rewrote it, and I rewrote it again, put it away for a while. And then when I revisited again, ultimately, I found it kind of lacking, and I wasn't sure how to fix it. The characters never gelled, the story never coalesced. It was kind of, I don't know. So I scrapped it, and I wrote a whole other earthquake novel. And I rewrote that one several times, and then attempted to find representation for the manuscript after I felt like it was done, because my former agent was strictly YA, and I really wanted to break into the adult market. So that was a different deal. But I decided too that I just seen a lot of authors get tossed around in the big five, because it's been very volatile in the last few years. And it's just like, first you get an agent, then, once the agent decides that your book is ready, then they, go out with it. And, it just took forever. So I thought, I think I'm going to change my way I'm going to go about this. And I'm going to go and toward the small presses on my own. So I submitted to several small presses and, amassed a bunch of rejections, including Ooligan, by the way. I approached Ooligan, did the submittable thing and all that. And after a couple of months, they kicked it back and said, thanks, but no thanks. But then a few months later, Ooligan approached me again, asking if I'd be open to further development of the book with no guarantee that they'd acquire it. And I jumped at the chance because it was like, oh my gosh, like I get this chance to collaborate with this wonderful group of people. It worked out really, really well. The editorial direction was enthusiastic and thorough. And, with Ooligan, what they are, it's a publishing program through PSU. It's a master's program. And so you get this entire team of avid learners that, and they're not kids, a lot of them are looking at second careers in publishing and so on. So, it's like they're book people, and they have meetings where they talk about your book, and there's like this mass amount of input for every step of the way. So they finally acquired it. And then I had to rewrite it a couple more times. So, the persistence isn't just with getting it published. It's also the fact that once you've gotten that contract, you're still going to be revisiting and quarreling over commas and things like that, until it actually is good to go and out it goes. And then you pray when you pick it up, you're not going to see a typo. But it does really take a lot, and it's a welcome journey. I mean, really, I am grateful that my first attempt at the earthquake novel didn't get picked up because, I just didn't have the same relationship with it that I did with these particular characters after having them live inside me for so long. So from here, I guess we can talk a little bit maybe about that. We, all three of us are published by small presses, and then maybe we can open it up for any questions that might be coming our way. So I'm going to turn it back to Joanna.
So I think here we are at an independent bookstore. We've all been published by independent presses. Small Crowd of Strangers was picked up by the brilliant Laura Stanfill. And I was so thrilled to be invited to join the Forest Avenue Press family. It's just been an extraordinary way to spend my COVID year is being part of that group. And what I know, there's a lot of writers out there. I kind of looked at the chat, and I think it's really heartening for people to understand that there are so many routes to getting your work out there, and contests and small presses. They're all exciting, and they're all just rich with possibility. And it's one of my favorite things to talk about. So we're going to open it up to questions. Sally's going to field some questions for us. Right, Sally?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So yes, one of our attendees would like to know, when you guys are working on a project, do you tend to avoid reading other similar things? Do you read, because all of you have mentioned things that you read for inspiration and to help instruct you. Do you tend to avoid reading certain things while you're working on a project? What do you like to turn to when you're thick in a project?
I would like to say that I would avoid reading certain things, but I am such a junkie of a reader that I couldn't avoid anything if I tried. If a book ends up in my hands, I read it. I know I was very aware of what it took to get away from the sound of Tom Spanbauer's voice. That's a really rich musical voice, and that was a tricky one to undo, to get out of my ears. But no, I don't avoid reading things. I couldn't if I tried.
Any of the rest of you have anything you want to jump in on that one?
Sure.
I don't. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead,
Susan.
Ellen. You go first.
All right. Yeah, I'm always reading. I'm always reading things, and but I don't limit that either. I don't read as much first person anymore. I'm more interested in third person, but I don't. I don't shy away from things. Yeah, no, I don't.
Yeah, I agree. I cannot stay away from books. And they inspire me. They get me, it's like a pep rally for me. I read a really good book and it's just like, I want to write like that. And sometimes it's just on the sentence level, beautiful sentence, the musicality that lingers in your ear. And, it just provides for me that little endorphin rush. So I think it's actually pretty crucial to my working life to be reading while I'm writing. I don't read just anything though, like I'm not reading YA right now because I'm working in the adult space. So, there's definitely some congeniality with what I'm reading and writing.
I know that
So go ahead.
one thing I do always read is poetry, because I find that it's a way to center myself in language and kind of come to a quiet place in my approach to the page. Yes,
I hear that a lot. I hear that a lot from writers.
Really?
Yes, I do. You're all very smart. One of the attendees would like you each to say more about the process of editing once you've signed with a publisher, what that process looks like.
I can jump in. Yeah, a friend of mine from the MFA said she couldn't believe how much I still had to do after it was accepted for publication. Some of those little blurps when SEMA just spit out stuff were like 3 or 4 pages, and that was enough to get it published, but I had to expand it. So, and it's different because, well, you're going to be published and you really listen to people, but you also have to stand your ground, because there was a chapter, a particular chapter that my editor thought, this doesn't work. And it didn't work where it was. I needed to move it around, but I knew it was going to stay. And I just had to figure out how to make that happen. So you learn through working with lots of different people. You get lots of different inputs, and it's confusing because sometimes you hear totally opposite things from different people. When you're working with one editor, you hear more of one thing, but you still have to hold on to your own vision. But it's still, I went through the whole book all again, and made a lot of changes, which were for the better, for the good. It was fun. It was different. It was a different experience, but very enjoyable.
So with Ooligan, I went through 2 rather big developmental edits. And, I work on the other side of the desk as well as an editor. And I generally just do developmental editing. And you really have to suspend your writer, your creator head a little bit when you get those notes back, because really what, the editors are looking at is like, how does somebody, how is the audience going to react to this? What things are you setting up? What kind of a contract are you setting up with the reader? Those sorts of things, which is really hard to discern in your own work, I think. So it's very helpful to have those 2 developmental edits. And they really helped also with some structural issues that I had as far as locating the reader in time and space. So they came up with some really cool guidelines to help make sure that the reader knew where they were and who was speaking and all of that kind of stuff and where we were in time. And so that was all part of the developmental edit process. And after that, we went into more of a copy editing process where there were spreadsheets involved. And I have to tell you, my eyes crossed. It was like doing my taxes for like 3 weeks, because you found a typo or something you wanted to change in a sentence. And then you had to like put it on the spreadsheet and indicate what page it was on. And, and I was doing this both from an ARC, a printed copy, and also an electronic copy. And they were different. The pagination was different. So it became this really headache-inducing process, but so necessary, because I can't tell you, you pick up your own book and you see a typo in it, it's heartbreaking. It's really like, how did this get through? So I really welcomed it, but I won't say that, I took every single suggestion. And when I didn't take a suggestion, I really had to step back beyond the creator and be a little bit more objective and go, okay, why do I need this in? What is it doing? And how can I make it better? Maybe if I can sell it better, I can keep it in, that sort of a thing. So it's a completely different process than when you're actually writing the draft. And I loved it. I love getting input from readers and, you know, a team of readers in particular. So enjoyed it.
Well, I'll pick up on the idea of copy editing, because I worked with the most amazing copy editor. Her name is Maya Myers, and I think she's going to be up for sainthood. She was so detail oriented that the conversations just were, well, first thing we had to do is make it clear, no, Maya, there will be no semicolons. I drew the line at semicolons. And it came down to a conversation about, look at this run-on sentence, and here's another one, and here's another one. And so it became a conversation about voice. And it was like, yeah, they're run-on sentences because that's how this character thinks. That's why there aren't any in this other character. And she asked some really hard questions about things like that, because she is like the grammar queen. It also turns out she's the Scrabble queen. And I have a very detailed Scrabble game in my book. And she literally called me on it. She says, you know, you cannot get that many points with this word. And sure enough, I had to set the Scrabble game up. It was really fun working with somebody that looked at the structure of the sentences that closely. I have one character in the book who doesn't really use correct grammar. And the first time through, Maya went through and corrected her grammar. I went, no, that wasn't me, that was her. It was, and it was a challenge going, yes, I do want these run-on sentences. And no, I know that that's not how you use that word. But her close look was amazing. And it's a thrill to know somebody's looking that closely at your work. She also had this grasp of historical fact, like there was no Piggly Wiggly in St. Cloud, Minnesota that year. I went, okay, it's fiction. I'm going to put Piggly Wiggly in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Fun conversations like that. And as a
You know what's so remarkable listening to you guys talk is that level of editorial attention just doesn't happen at the large publishing houses. I mean, that is, you were saying earlier, you know, Susie, that you intentionally chose to pursue working with a small publisher. We're seeing so much growth in the small publisher community right now. And part of it is that level of attention is good for the authors, but it's good for the reader too. It makes better books. So we love seeing all these small presses. So now we have a question about research. Somebody wants to know, how important is the historical, scientific, and professional background information in your writing, and what steps do you take to get those facts correct?
Yeah,
So
my
whoever
Achilles heel was, you know, write about an earthquake, you gotta, you know, do research. God darn it. But yeah, I actually was really fortunate because somebody knew the person in charge of emergency preparedness. And, you know, halfway through my manuscript, I got to sit down with her and ask her a whole bunch of questions and get a whole bunch of, you know, links for where I could find other questions that I had and so on. But, you know, setting this in the future, my book is set in 2030. And during the time of editing, so many things happened that informed what would happen 10 years from now, as far as, well, just, you know, climate change stuff, technology, you know, facial recognition technology works its way in there. So there was a lot of different research that, you know, I needed to, I mean, the bar just kept, you know, going up and up and up, and it was like, oh my God, you know, this new thing just happened. You know, at some point I had to cut it off and just decide, okay, I'm not setting this 2 years from now, because if it comes out and this stuff hasn't happened yet, then, you know, where's the speculative adventure, right? So I decided I'm going to set this 10 years from now so that, you know, when it comes out, it's still all that stuff is way in the future and I can invent a lot of it. But it did have to be informed. Some of the stuff that I went into had to be informed by actual science. So yeah, so research was, you know, was kind of a pain, but it was interesting. I went down a lot of rabbit holes, put it that way.
Well, I didn't have any real historical research that needed to be part of my book, aside from the Piggly Wiggly. But there is a big question of Catholicism on several levels in my story. And it was a challenge to get that right because even the Catholic Church doesn't agree on a lot of that stuff, like annulment, what it takes to get an annulment. And you know, certain aspects of the liturgy that I would have been just as happy to just kind of put it in there, but I felt like it was important to get that right. But the rest of it I got to pretty much make up. The Piggly Wiggly, the Riverwalk in Montclair, New Jersey, you know, the shops in St. Cloud, even the town that the book ends in on Vancouver Island is the little town of Tofino. And I used to spend a lot of time in Tofino about 35 years ago, and it's completely changed. Well, the book is set in 2002, and I established the town of Tofino that I used to hang in back in the 70s. So I took, you know, a lot of liberties with fact. Ellen, you had a much bigger challenge.
You're muted, Ellen. Ellen?
Yeah, I know I was
There you go.
trying.
Oh.
I was hitting it wrong. Well, yes and no. You know, the hospital was loosely based on where I was an intern. So I knew that world really, really well. And then at one point I went back to, you know, I wanted to see the swirly linoleum floor, and I couldn't find it because they had changed it. And then I had to say, I'm not going to go walking around there because I have these images in my head and I want to stay with those images because that's what I know. I don't want to put a different floor in there. But I did have to, so that part wasn't hard. It was hard to sometimes to know how I could, if I was translating it enough, I was not making it simple, but that people could understand it because I know that world so intimately, the medicine stuff. I did, you know, I decided to have my, Decima is Polish. She speaks Polish. Her mother didn't speak any English. And I decided to have Polish, she uses some Polish words and I don't know Polish at all. So I had help with that. My advisor, Bonnie Jo Campbell, had hooked me up with a friend of hers who initially translated a lot of the things that I had characters say in Polish. And then when I went through with the copy editor, he was looking things up on Google to see if they were accurate. He didn't really know. And I just said, I don't know. I look it up. And so then I found another native Polish speaker. My ex-fiance had been Polish, but he couldn't do it because he couldn't read Polish and he didn't have the language skills, but his sister did. And so she came in and said, this is how it is. And then I would say to the copy editor, this is how it is, because this is a Polish speaker who knows. So that's where research came in that. And then just staying true to the period. And I had to look up a few things like, oh, did they have this then? Or this is the 1980s we didn't have lots of things, but to make sure that I wasn't throwing in something that didn't exist at the time. So it was a little different than Susie and Joanna's research. But you can go down a lot of rabbit holes, yes.
Yeah, I think it's really, I think the hard part is knowing when to stop researching and just commit to, this is what I'm going to say. Somebody else would like to know about your experience working with peer critique groups. Are any of you currently in a peer critique group, and what is that experience like? Anybody want to grab that one?
Yeah, I love being in a peer critique group. I work with a group of writers that I've been with for years and years and years. Including Jackie Shannon Hollis, who's another Forest Avenue Press writer. These are writers who came out of Pinewood Table, and as such, they're kind of offshoots of Dangerous Writers. So we share a language of critique kind of going into it. And we share pages and talk about pages, but there's also this ongoing conversation about writing, about the craft and the culture. That's really just a really rich part of my life. So yeah, I love the idea of a peer critique group, and it helps keep me on track, keeps me reined in a little bit, and it keeps me turning up every week with pages.
Susie or Ellen, do you want to?
I had quite a bit of peer group critique for Faultland and the book that preceded it that never got published. This last year has been odd, right? I mean, we were all kind of doing our, whatever we were doing peer critique wise through Zoom, which for me wasn't ideal. So what I like to do now is wait till I have a body of work and then trade with a peer rather than bring in pages every week, kind of a thing. I guess that's where I am right now. So, my old critique group is making sounds like wanting to get back together this summer. So we'll see what happens.
Ellen, do you have anything you want to add on that, or?
Big trouble with my mute there. Yeah, I'm not in a group right now. I have also enjoyed it when I am. I think it gets you there. It gets you to bring the pages in. And it's a lonely process sitting there writing by yourself, and it's really great to have the feedback and to have the camaraderie and to know that there's other people out there cheering for you and supporting you, even when they're critical. So I think it's a good idea. I've been in a couple that didn't work so well. It's challenging sometimes to get the right combination of people. Right now I'm not in any group at all, and wondering when I want to show something, because I don't have anything that I'm ready to show anybody, but I will.
Okay. And we have another question that's asking how helpful were each of your presses in marketing the book? Yes, no?
Well, you probably what marketing happened because of Laura Stanfill at Forest Avenue Press. I think when you work with a small press, you need to take a lot of it on yourself. And there was a lot that I didn't know how to do technologically. And then COVID happened. So there were no bookstores. But some of Laura's contacts were amazingly helpful. Like I got to speak at the Pacific Northwest Bookseller Association trade show dinner virtually, but that was through the publisher. And I think that when you work with a small press, it's much more of a publicity partnership than my experience with a major press. And it's also more fun.
Yeah, I would say, what I really appreciated with Ooligan is there are some people that really know their way around Adobe Creative Suites there. So they were able to put, together these sexy banners and Instagram things. And I still don't really know how to use Instagram. I had to take over Instagram for a day. And of course I messed it up. Like the first thing that I did in the wrong place, So it was, like there are some deficits that I had. They really held my hand to move me along there. But I will say that, we all put books out during COVID, and that's a whole different experience, right? My YA books came out, in regular time, and there were just a lot more things you could do with that. But I think that, the small presses generally, it is, as Joanna said, it's like a partnership. You ideally you get together and you know, whether it's a conference call or, you know, God forbid in person, you know, just to kind of talk about what you guys, what everybody wants from, you know, what are the goals and what are the various areas, you know, that you're going to hit, and who is best. I mean, the marketing starts well before the book comes out, right? I mean, there's catalogs and there's trade shows and there's this and there's that. So, you know, generally a small press, any press will send you out a questionnaire that you fill out, because they're going to be sending out press kits. And, you know, and this is a way for them to actually have like a ready-made interview if they want to do something like that. Yeah, Ooligan was really wonderful at being proactive in that way.
Yeah, I think I found it a little daunting at times, more afterwards, after my book came out than before. I think I don't know if Melville does this. My editor said that maybe they have kind of a short a window between when we work on a book and when it goes to press. So things get truncated, and then, you know, COVID was right in the middle of all that. So that was really challenging, and I wasn't really aware of all the things that were happening or what was happening, and so that's and what could I do, or more that I could do, and people were giving me advice I should, you know, do some other things, you know, and I really didn't know what I was supposed to do, or what I could do, or what was reasonable. Or some people work with outside publicists, and, you know, I just I didn't know. You know, I wanted to be respectful, and I didn't really know. I had no idea. And I think a lot of that is first time author, in addition to having COVID on top of it. And so it's a learning process. It's a learning process. But I felt supported, and it was a wonderful experience overall. Stressful sometimes, especially at the end afterwards.
Okay, I think it's just about wrapping up time. So I think that we're going to wrap up by asking each of you to give one short piece of advice to a first-time unpublished author. But before you start, I just want to do a little, we've got Susie Vitello's Faultland, Ellen Michelson's The Care of Strangers, Joanna Rose, A Small Crowd of Strangers. Oops. See, I have my filter on.
Yeah.
I want you to see the dog, though. There we go. They're all great covers. That was my way of stalling, to give you all time to think about your one piece of advice that you would give to an author who is out there working, persisting, but hasn't crossed over the bar yet. So who wants to jump in first?
Okay, so my piece of advice is one that I haven't always taken, which is don't write to trends. You know, it's really important. If you're just writing to a trend, you're not necessarily going to be in love with what you're writing, and you really need to be in love with it. You know, it's a long haul. You're with these characters for a long time. So I would say, you know, that's my piece of advice. Don't write to trends.
That's so close to what I was going to say, Susie. The first thing I thought of was pay attention to what you love.
Yeah.
It's going to be there in your work. And sometimes it's only in your work because you love it, and you can question it. Is this really part of the story, or is it there because I love it?
Yeah.
But sometimes it's your guiding light, and it'll keep you connected with both your work and your life. If you pay attention to what you love, it's there in the intersection of those two projects, your book and your life.
And I just add similarly, but to say, you know, really hold on to what you feel your story, what you want to write about, and what you think you're writing about. And no one really knows what you want to do except you. And even if you don't have the skills to do it at a time, hold on to it, and don't let anybody tell you you can't do that. Just do it. Figure out how to do it.
Well, I think that's brilliant advice from all three of you. And thank you all very much. Susie and Joanna and Ellen for joining us this evening. Thank you, audience, for joining us. I've posted a link in the chat box that gives you an opportunity to purchase the newest books from these three authors, which is a great way to support local authors, local bookstores, indie presses. There's also a link in the chat box to our upcoming events in June. Got a couple more good ones coming up, so we'll hope we'll see you all again soon. And with that, I bid you all adieu, and I hope to see you all in the bookstore soon. Take care.